the right-wing, anti-immigration leaders has long been a thorn in Brussels' side, and after securing his first consecutive term, he is expected to once again bemoan immigration, crack down on NGOs and challenge EU integration. Mr. Orban has repeatedly clashed with the European Commission during his time in charge of Hungary, opposing plans to distribute migrants around the bloc. Speaking after his resounding victory, Mr. Orban said, "I congratulate the voters. In times like this it's better to be modest." He added the victory gives him an opportunity to defend Hungary. Given the history between Mr. Orban and the EU, there will likely not be many celebrations in Brussels of the Hungarian Prime Minister's re-election. Here are 5 reasons why the bloc's leaders could be sent into a panic. Getty News. Viktor Orban re-election to send shockwaves through European Union with bloc change demands. We don't want to go against Europe and the EU, we want Europe and the EU to be strong together. Viktor Orban 1. Supermajority. Mr. Orban's far-right Fidesz party is expected to secure 133 of the 199 seats in the Hungarian parliament. The two-thirds supermajority would give Mr. Orban and his party the opportunity to change the country's constitution on its own. The victory gives Mr. Orban the chance to embolden policies that have already put him at loggerheads with the EU. Crackdowns on civil society, the media and courts. Neighboring Poland gave Brussels a headache when its leaders in the Law and Justice Party announced sweeping changes to the country's judicial system. The Commission threatened to launch sanctions against Warsaw, which could have seen its government stripped of voting rights. 2. A direct message to Brussels. In his victory speech, Mr. Orban sent a direct warning to Brussels, demanding changes to the bloc. While claiming he is not anti-EU, the Hungarian leader called out an ailing continent. He said, "We want to call out what's ailing this continent. We don't want to go against Europe and the EU, we want Europe and the EU to be strong together. But before that we must be honest about what's hurting us." 3. Vladimir Putin's ally. Vladimir Putin very rarely makes trips to EU member states, but one of his recent destinations of travel was Hungary. At a time when Moscow is under close observations after the alleged state involvement in the poisoning of former intelligence official Sergei Skripal in the UK, Mr. Orban is one of the EU's strongest supporters of the Russian president. Dmitry Trinin, director of the Moscow Carnegie Center, said, "Budapest is one of the few UE capitals where President Putin can feel at ease meeting with someone who shares elements of his own worldview. Such reception allows Moscow to claim that not all Europeans follow policies shunning Russia's leadership." 4. A populist blueprint. Mr. Orban's campaign has presented a blueprint for other populist leaders looking to make waves in their own country's general election. Anti-establishment parties across Poland and France have already hailed the result, and will likely adopt the Hungarians' election tactics in their own plights. Marine Le Pen said, "A big and clear victory for Viktor Orban in Hungary. The change of values and the mass immigration extolled by the EU have again been rejected." However, he might have also borrowed some methods from UKIP's own Brexit campaign. In March, the Hungarian government used the same controversial photo used in UKIP's Breaking Point poster. In Hungary, the image was published on Facebook and said, "The government's information campaign on the migration starts into its new phase." The government wants to highlight the fact that the UN's migration guidelines would allow more immigration. "We think that immigration poses a serious risk, therefore it must be stopped." 5. Brussels tussles from allegations of misused EU funds to threats of the removal of Hungary voting rights. Brussels faces another 4 years of likely conflict with Mr. Orban. Despite the harsh words from Mr. Orban, Budapest has benefited from around €34 billion having been pumped into the country by the EU. The EU's anti-corruption agency, OLAF, released a report in January claiming a company belonging to Mr. Orban's son-in-law regularly received huge sums from the EU funds. Hungary could ask to be asked to repay the funding in a Brussels crackdown. EU leaders could also choose to use the same Article 7 punishment to restrict Hungary's voting rights. However, senior MEP Philippe Lambert doubts the appetite of Brussels to implement the restrictions. He said, "I do not see any political will." The Commission announced it looks forward to working with the Hungarian government for the many joint challenges we face.